The story of Daniel. The book of Daniel opens in a moment of national heartbreak. Babylon has attacked Jerusalem, plundered its temple, and carried off many of Israel's brightest young people into exile. Among them are 4 men from the royal family of David: Daniel, later called Belteshazzar, and his 3 friends, better known by their Babylonian names, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. This book tells the story of their struggle to hold on to hope and faith while living in the land of their conquerors. At first glance, the book seems to have a clear structure. Chapters 1 through 6 contain stories about Daniel and his friends navigating life in Babylon. Chapters 7 through 12 shift into Daniel's prophetic visions about the future. But the design goes deeper. The book begins in Hebrew, the language of Israel. Then from chapters 2 through 7, the text switches to Aramaic, the international language of ancient empires. Finally, chapters 8 through 12 return to Hebrew. This pattern highlights chapters 2 and 7 as literary anchors, helping readers understand the entire message of the book. The opening chapter introduces the tension that runs through the first half. Daniel and his friends are brilliant and capable, chosen to serve in the Babylonian royal court. But they are also pressured to surrender their Jewish identity by eating and living like Babylonians, breaking the food laws of the Torah. They refuse. Their faithfulness puts them at risk, yet God protects them, and the king ends up elevating them above all the other trainees. This leads into the Aramaic section, which forms a beautifully balanced structure. First comes a dramatic episode. King Nebuchadnezzar has a troubling dream that no one can interpret except Daniel. The dream reveals a massive statue made of 4 metals, symbolizing a sequence of future kingdoms, starting with Babylon. Suddenly, a stone appears, uncut by human hands, striking the statue and shattering it. The stone grows into a mountain that fills the earth. Daniel explains, the statue represents human empires that rise through power and violence, but one day God's kingdom will break into history and replace them all with a rule of justice, healing, and peace. Next comes the famous story of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego. A giant idol is constructed representing the king and his imperial authority, and everyone must bow to it. The 3 friends refuse. They are thrown into a blazing furnace, yet God rescues them. The king, awestruck, acknowledges that their God is truly powerful. Then the narrative turns to 2 Babylonian kings, Nebuchadnezzar and his son Belshazzar. Both are arrogant, blinded by their imperial power. As in the earlier dream, God confronts them through symbolic visions that only Daniel can interpret. Daniel warns them to humble themselves before God. Nebuchadnezzar eventually does, but only after losing his sanity and living like a beast until he acknowledges God's authority. Belshazzar never humbles himself, and he is killed the very night of his defiant feast. These stories echo themes from Genesis and Psalm 8, where humans are described as God's royal image bearers, created to rule over creation on God's behalf. But when humans elevate themselves and their power above God, they cease to act human at all. They become beast-like, violent, destructive, and destined for judgment. Chapter 6 mirrors Chapter 3. This time, it is Daniel himself who refuses to worship the king. He is thrown into a den of lions, but once again, God rescues his faithful servant. The king responds by praising Daniel's God. All of this brings us to the pivotal chapter of the book, Chapter 7. It mirrors Chapter 2 and sits at the literary center where the book's themes converge. Daniel has a dream of 4 terrifying beasts: a lion, a bear, a winged leopard, and a monstrous, indescribable creature covered in horns. Each represents an arrogant kingdom. One horn symbolizes an especially prideful king who persecutes God's people. In the dream, God, described as the Ancient of Days, takes his throne, destroys the final beast, and exalts one like a son of man, who ascends on the clouds to sit beside God and rule over all nations. The Son of Man represents both God's people and their promised king from David's line. Now the earlier stories fall into place. The stories of faithfulness encourage God's people to persevere through persecution. The visions explain why persecution happens, because human kingdoms often rebel against God and become beast-like. But the visions also promise that God will ultimately establish his kingdom and vindicate his people. The final chapters explore when God's rescue will happen. In chapter 8, Daniel sees another symbolic vision, this time of a ram representing the Medo-Persian Empire and a goat representing Greece. A horn emerges from the goat, symbolizing the arrogant king mentioned earlier, one who will attack Jerusalem, desecrate the temple, and exalt himself above God. But eventually, God will defeat him and restore his people. By chapter 9, Daniel is confused about the timing of these events. He studies the prophet Jeremiah, who wrote that the exile would last 70 years. Since those years are nearly complete, Daniel prays earnestly for God's fulfillment. But an angel explains that because Israel's rebellion has continued, their period of hardship will be extended, symbolically multiplied sevenfold. The final vision in chapters 10 through 12 shows a detailed sequence of future kingdoms, including Persia, Greece, and a series of rulers culminating in a proud king of the north who desecrates the temple and oppresses God's people, until he suddenly falls. Scholars have long debated the precise historical fulfillment of these visions. Many see connections to the tyrant Antiochus IV in the 160s BC. Others see echoes of Rome's destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70. Still others believe these events point forward to the end times when Jesus returns. The ambiguity is intentional. The symbols fit multiple eras, allowing each generation to recognize the patterns in their own time. That's why Jesus drew from Daniel's imagery to describe the corrupt leaders of his day. It's why the book of Revelation builds on Daniel to describe Rome and future empires yet to come. The message of Daniel is timeless. Human kingdoms become beasts when they glorify their own power, redefine morality, and reject God as their true king. But Daniel offers a promise. God will confront the beasts. He will rescue his world. He will establish his eternal kingdom. And for every generation, Daniel speaks a word of hope. Stay faithful. Stand firm. The Ancient of Days is on the throne, and his kingdom will come.